The invasion fleet arrived during the only hour on Earth when the planet looked truly dead. It was not coincidence. It was precision. At 2:17 Coordinated Universal Time, every major power grid across the planet shut down in perfect synchronization. Cities that usually blaze like constellations went dark. Skyscrapers became silhouettes. Highways froze into silent ribbons of stalled light. From orbit, Earth looked wounded, an aging world choking on its own failure. And that was exactly when the fleet entered. 47 warships tore through transit space above the moon like blades ripping silk. Their hulls were black enough to swallow starlight, their engines bright enough to paint the Pacific silver. 3 command dreadnoughts anchored the formation, each one so massive it cast a shadow over continents below. To Supreme Marshal Cale Veron, standing at the forward observation deck of the flagship Dominion Spear, it looked like every conquest before it. A frightened world, a primitive species, a final lesson waiting to be taught. He folded his hands behind his back and stared down at the blue sphere below, wrapped in cloud and silence. Confirmed planetary condition. His tactical officer didn't look away from her station. Global communications fractured, energy infrastructure unstable. Civilian panic rising in multiple regions. No organized orbital defense. No fleet signatures beyond low-orbit satellites. Weak, exactly as the intelligence reports promised. Humans were an anomaly only in how long they had remained irrelevant. One inhabited planet. No colonies. No faster-than-light capability. Thousands of internal governments pretending to be one civilization. Their species had split the atom, poisoned their own atmosphere, and somehow survived long enough to call it progress. Cale had conquered species with moons made of war factories. This one still argued about borders drawn on dirt. He gave them 1 hour. Not 6, like protocol required for civilized systems. 1. Because fear did not need 6 hours when 47 warships were hanging over your atmosphere. The surrender terms were transmitted in every known human language. Total military dissolution. Full resource compliance. Planetary governance transferred to Dominion oversight. Resistance punishable by orbital cleansing. Standard terms. Mathematics, not cruelty. He expected denial, confusion, desperate attempts at negotiation. Instead, 23 minutes later, Earth answered. No video channel. No diplomats. No emotional speeches. Just one text transmission. 7 words. You are trespassing in a graveyard. The bridge went silent. Cale read it once. Then again, around him, officers exchanged uncertain looks, not because the message was threatening, but because it wasn't. There was no rage in it, no fear, no plea for mercy, only certainty. His communications officer cleared her throat. Marshal, there is no government signature attached. No origin? None. It was transmitted globally. Every major command structure on the planet repeated it simultaneously. Not one nation. All of them. Cale's jaw tightened. He disliked unknowns. Unknowns were where wars changed shape. Run deep scans, he said. Full spectrum planetary analysis. I want every military installation, every hidden launch platform, every underground structure. The tactical team moved instantly. For 30 seconds, only the hum of the flagship remained. Then someone stopped breathing. Cale turned. His sensor chief was staring at her display with the pale expression of someone who had opened the wrong door. Report. Her voice came carefully. Marshal, there are energy signatures beneath the oceans. He stepped closer. She expanded the map. The Pacific lit first, then the Atlantic, then beneath the Arctic ice, under deserts, beneath mountain ranges, under places humans had labeled empty. Thousands. Not active. Sleeping. Ancient. Buried so deep they should not have existed. Weapons platforms. Defense grids. Shipyards. Launch systems older than modern human governments. Older, perhaps, than human recorded history itself. Cale stared at the impossible architecture hidden beneath Earth's skin. This was not a civilization preparing for invasion. This was a civilization that had buried its own war. His intelligence officer whispered, almost to herself, "Why would they hide this?" No one answered. because at that exact moment, another alert appeared, not from Earth. From the outer edge of the solar system, a containment field was activating. Massive, planet-wide, ancient, and it was closing. Around them, the tactical officer turned, and for the first time since entering orbit, she looked afraid. Marshal, her voice nearly failed. We are not being kept out. She looked at the shrinking perimeter around the fleet. We are being kept in. For 3 full seconds, no one on the bridge moved. The words hung there heavier than any weapon. We are being kept in. Supreme Marshal Cale Veron stood motionless before the tactical display, watching the containment perimeter spread, like invisible fire across the outer system. It did not look like a shield. It looked like a verdict, cold, mathematical, and already decided long before his fleet had arrived. He had spent 21 years breaking civilizations. He knew panic when he saw it. This was not panic. This was preparation. How old? He asked. The sensor chief swallowed. We are still estimating, sir. The infrastructure beneath the planet. Some signatures suggest centuries. Others, she hesitated. Speak. Some appear older than several known interstellar empires. Silence again. That was impossible. Humanity had no recorded galactic contact before modern observation. They were supposed to be isolated, late, irrelevant, a species still learning how not to kill itself with weather and politics. And yet beneath their oceans slept enough hidden military architecture to make half the council worlds nervous. Cale looked down at Earth again. The planet no longer looked primitive. It looked patient. Find me their leadership, he said. Real leadership, not public theater. Someone made the decision to build this. His intelligence division began tearing through human political structures, military chains, and historical archives. The results only made things worse. There was no supreme ruler, no emperor, no singular war authority. There were nations, alliances, rivalries, contradictions. But in the last 23 minutes, every major military network on the planet had responded, as if a single hand had moved across all of them at once. Someone had pressed a button, and no one could find who. Far below, Earth remained dark, not chaotic, controlled. Cities had not dissolved into riots. Traffic rerouted with surgical precision. Air corridors shifted. Civilian populations moved away from coastlines, mountain regions, and empty deserts, places the Dominion would have ignored entirely. It was evacuation, but not from the fleet, from something else. Cale hated that most. He had come expecting fear of him. Instead, humanity seemed afraid of what happened next. In a secure intelligence chamber 6 decks below, Archivist Cell Aner sat surrounded by dead records. She was not military. She was older than most officers on the ship and infinitely less liked because she had the unpleasant habit of noticing things command preferred buried. She had been brought to the campaign because humans were classified as culturally unstable, which usually meant simple. They were not simple. She had spent the last hour pulling fragments from abandoned council archives, files flagged, restricted, partially erased. Most species left history behind like footprints. Humans looked like someone had tried to scrub them out. She found references without bodies, warnings without explanations, entire diplomatic chains ending in silence. One file from 900 years earlier contained only a single surviving sentence. Do not provoke soul unless extinction is preferable to patience. No signature. No attached report. Just that. Cell stared at it for a long time. Then she found something worse. A redacted council session from centuries ago involving a sector designation she recognized immediately. Sol, Earth. Most of the document had been erased. But one phrase remained untouched by mistake or mercy. Quarantine maintained by unanimous vote. So leaned back slowly, not ignored. Quarantined. She felt cold. On the bridge, Cale received the report with visible irritation. Quarantine, he repeated. Cell stood before him, hands folded behind her back. Yes, Marshal. By whom? The old council records are incomplete, deliberately incomplete. Meaning someone removed the reason. Cale turned away from her and looked again at Earth. He disliked myths. Myths were what weak civilizations invented to explain strong ones. But myths had roots. Someone had once feared humanity enough to bury the explanation. Continue. Cell hesitated only once. There is one repeating phrase across unrelated archives, different languages, different centuries, always the same meaning. Kale said nothing. She continued, "Do not wake what learns from war." The bridge felt colder after she said it. His tactical officer let out a short breath. That sounds like superstition. So met her eyes. No, superstition sounds safer. Before anyone could answer, alarms cut through the room. Sharp, immediate, the tactical display shifted. Across Earth's surface, those buried signatures were beginning to wake. One by one, under the Pacific, a line of submerged platforms powered on like stars rising from the ocean floor. Under Siberian ice, heat signatures bloomed. Beneath the Sahara, something vast turned over in the dark. No launches, no attacks, just awakening. Kale watched the pattern form. It was not random. It was a network, a planetary machine built not for sudden defense, but for an event expected long in advance. His communications officer turned from her console, her face pale. There's another message from Earth. This time, it came with a source. No government seal. No military designation. Just a name. General Elias Ward. Retired. Age 73. Official status. Deceased. Kale narrowed his eyes. Open it. The screen flickered to life. An old man sat in a dim room lit only by a desk lamp and the orange glow of what looked like a city blackout beyond his window. His hair was silver, his posture straight, and his expression carried the calm of someone who had already survived the worst thing in the room. He looked directly into the camera, not at the fleet, at Kale. When he spoke, his voice was quiet enough to force everyone to listen. "You looked at our silence and thought it meant weakness." He folded his hands. "That was your first mistake." Behind him, somewhere far below the city, the ground trembled. Kale leaned forward without realizing it. Ward's eyes did not move. "You saw one planet and assumed we had nowhere to run." A faint smile touched his face, but there was no warmth in it. "You never asked why we stayed." The transmission cut. No explanation. No demands. Only that. And beneath Earth, the graveyard kept waking. The first strike came from the Dominion because Kale Veron refused to let uncertainty become weakness. He had listened to General Elias Ward's message 3 times in silence, searching for the trick hidden beneath the calm. Old men with quiet voices did not frighten him. Empires were not built by respecting ghosts, but buried weapons were not ghosts. They were choices, and choices could be broken. He chose the Pacific Orbital Defense Array, an old human military installation near the western coast of North America. It was visible enough to matter, large enough to be understood, and close enough to civilian populations that the lesson would spread quickly. The purpose was simple. Pain restores mathematics. He did not want extermination. Not yet. He wanted surrender. The Dominion spear aligned above the target. Energy built inside the spinal cannon, bright enough to stain the bridge windows blue-white. Officers stood straighter. Systems locked. Every warship in the fleet adjusted formation to witness the moment. Kale gave the order. The beam fell like judgment. From orbit, it looked almost elegant. A single line of impossible light descending through cloud and atmosphere until it struck the coast with enough force to erase geography. The ocean rose in a wall of steam. Mountains vanished. Steel became memory. When the glare faded, the installation was gone. So were 87,000 people. Silence followed. Kale stood at the forward glass, waiting for the response he had seen across dozens of worlds. Panic, channels opening, leaders ready to bargain with blood still in the air. Instead, Earth did something far worse. Nothing. No surrender. No outrage. No emergency broadcast. No desperate plea for time. For 11 minutes, the planet simply continued breathing. Then the stars changed. At first, it looked like distortion. Small fractures in the darkness near the outer planets. Faint lines of silver moving where nothing should move. Then the tactical board lit red. Containment field expansion accelerating. The system was closing. Not slowly. Permanently. Report. Kale snapped. His tactical officer's hands moved fast across the display. The outer boundary has locked around the Kuiper perimeter. Transit lanes are collapsing. Jump coordinates are being overwritten. By what? We don't know. Sel Aner answered before anyone else could. By design. She stepped forward, her face pale in the bridge light. This was never a shield against invasion. It was built to isolate the entire system. Kale turned sharply. Meaning? She looked at Earth. Not him. Meaning they were never planning to keep enemies out. Another alarm. Then another. Deep space relays went dark one by one. Communication with Dominion command beyond the system vanished like stars being extinguished. No reinforcements. No retreat. No witnesses. The fleet was alone. Kale felt something unfamiliar pressing at the edges of discipline. Not fear. Recognition. This had not begun when they arrived. It had begun long before, and they had merely stepped into the center of it. Below them, Earth's darkness finally broke. Not with riots. With movement. Across continents, lights returned. Not civilian grids, but controlled military corridors. Hidden runways opened beneath farmland. Mountain ranges split to reveal launch shafts sealed for generations. Entire sections of desert unfolded like machines remembering their shape. Humanity was not scrambling. It was unlocking. In the Indian Ocean, one of the submerged signatures breached the surface. At first, Kale thought it was an island rising. Then it kept rising. A platform the size of a city pushed itself in the sea, water falling from its sides like broken weather. Gun batteries unfolded. Launch towers rotated skyward. Ancient steel met open air like a predator opening its eyes. And then another rose. And another. Across the oceans, the graveyard surfaced. His young tactical officer whispered the words before she could stop herself. They buried an entire war. Kale said nothing, because she was right. In a secure underground command center beneath the Rocky Mountains, General Elias Ward stood before a wall of live battlefield projections and looked older than history. Around him, officers moved with the quiet speed of people who had rehearsed this day in theory for 30 years and prayed it would never arrive. No one called him retired anymore. The title had come back the moment the first ship crossed lunar orbit. A younger commander approached him. Marshal Veron destroyed the Pacific Array. Ward nodded once. I know. Orders. Ward stared at the Dominion fleet above Earth. 47 ships. Now trapped, he had seen men like Kale before. Men who believed force was proof of understanding. Men who thought the destruction of the city was the beginning of surrender instead of the end of negotiation. He almost pitied him. Almost. Phase 2, Ward said. The room went still. Even among senior command, those words carried weight. The younger commander hesitated. Sir, once we begin Phase 2, there's no returning to diplomatic containment. Ward's eyes stayed on the screen. They killed 87,000 people to teach us fear. His voice remained calm. Teach them memory. No one argued. Orders moved. Across Earth, human military doctrine changed in a single breath. No longer survive. Learn. Adapt. Advance. In orbit, Kale watched as the first human ships launched from beneath the Atlantic platforms. They were ugly compared to Dominion design. Angular, scarred, built like tools instead of monuments. Primitive, until he noticed what made his blood run cold. They were not old. They were new. Fresh hull signatures. New engine architecture. Weapon systems designed around Dominion's shield harmonics, already collected during the first engagement. Not pre-war ships. War-built ships. In less than 24 hours. Sel Aner stepped beside him, voice low. They are not responding to us. Kale kept his eyes on the rising fleet. No, she swallowed. They are studying us. Far below, another transmission began. No request, no threat, just a single sentence from Elias Ward, broadcast to every Dominion vessel trapped inside the closing cage. You thought you came here to conquer a world. A pause, then the final line. What you did was remind us what we are. And for the first time in his career, Supreme Marshal Kale Veron looked at an enemy world and understood he might already be too late. The first battle for Earth did not happen above the planet. It happened on Mars. Kale Veyron chose it because Mars was supposed to be symbolic. A dead world, thin atmosphere, minimal human presence, a forward mining network and scattered research colonies. Nothing strategically vital by Dominion standards, but perfect for demonstrating inevitability. If humanity had begun turning their solar system into a fortress, Mars would be the first warning shot. Take Mars, and Earth would understand the shape of the future. Lose Mars, and the future changed. Kale sent the third assault wing. It should have been enough. 9 cruisers, 24 strike carriers, orbital suppression platforms, and enough mechanized infantry to erase every human structure from the red dust. Third wing had broken civilizations, with moons stronger than Mars. Against a species still pretending it was not at war, it was almost insulting. He expected a clean victory. He got 11 hours of confusion. The first reports sounded normal. Human outposts destroyed. Surface defenses neutralized. Initial orbital superiority secured. Then the reports became strange. Strike teams entered abandoned mining tunnels and found them empty. But recently empty. Equipment still warm. Coffee still hot. Screens still active. Humans had left minutes before arrival. Too precise for retreat. Too calm for panic. Then supply lines began disappearing. Not ships. Time. Convoys reached expected coordinates and found nothing. Landing zones shifted. Navigation systems failed only inside specific Martian valleys. Entire Dominion units were redirected by false emergency signals, carrying perfect command authentication. Someone was rewriting the battlefield while it was happening. Kale listened to the reports with growing silence. His tactical officers called it sabotage. Sel Aner called it education. They are learning command behavior, she said. Kale turned sharply. From one engagement? She met his stare. No, Marshal. From all of them. He said nothing, because he had already begun to suspect the same thing. Humans were not improvising. They were comparing. Every Dominion tactic was being measured against 10,000 years of human war doctrine, and somewhere on Earth, people were deciding which old monster best matched this new one. On the surface of Mars, Captain Mara Solis stood inside the ruins of collapsed transport hub and watched enemy armor burn against the horizon. Dust storms turned the sky blood red. Broken satellites fell like dying stars. Around her, exhausted soldiers reloaded weapons built from 3 different generations of human engineering and 1 very dead alien tank. She smiled despite herself. They still think this is about holding ground. Her second-in-command, bleeding through one sleeve, gave a tired laugh. Should we tell them? Mara checked the tactical map. Dominion forces were advancing exactly where command wanted them to, toward the tunnels, toward the places humans had abandoned, toward the kill zones. No, she said, let them feel smart. She had fought in 3 wars before Mars. None of them had involved aliens. All of them had involved enemies convinced superior firepower meant superior understanding. People repeated mistakes beautifully. Above them, Dominion dropships descended toward the canyon network. Ancient lava tunnels. Perfect cover. Perfect trap. Kale received the warning too late. Marshal, Third Wing is reporting simultaneous losses across 12 sectors. The display exploded red. Underground detonations. Pressure collapse events. Tunnel systems mapped in advance and rigged months earlier. Entire armor divisions disappeared beneath Martian stone before firing a second shot. Kale stepped forward. How? The answer came from battlefield telemetry. Human miners, not soldiers. For decades, civilian crews had expanded those tunnels, reinforced them, wired them, mapped them. Mars had not been colonized. It had been prepared. His officer's voice dropped. They knew exactly where we would land. Sel Aner stood very still. No, she said quietly. They knew exactly how someone like us would think. That was worse, far worse, because strategy could be countered. Pattern recognition meant they were fighting a species that treated invasion like a familiar language. Hours later, Third Wing won. Technically, Mars remained under Dominion orbital control. Human surface resistance fractured. Several colonies were destroyed. And yet the after-action report felt like a confession. 3 cruisers lost. 7 crippled. Ground casualties 4 times projected estimates. Strategic gain uncertain. Cale read the report twice. Then a third time. It was not the losses that bothered him. It was the tone. His commanders sounded like men describing whether they no longer trusted. That night, he listened to intercepted human battlefield channels. Not for intelligence, for understanding. He heard soldiers under bombardment discussing artillery angles with the same tone people use to discuss weather forecasts. He heard medics asking for blood types while laughing at bad jokes. He heard a pilot moments before crashing into a Dominion carrier, calmly reminding someone to feed his dog if he didn't make it back. There was no heroic performance in it, no grand speeches, just familiarity, as if catastrophe was not extraordinary to them, as if war was not a nightmare, but an old neighborhood they knew how to navigate. Cale turned the translator off halfway through. He stood alone at the observation deck and looked at Earth, still there, still lit, still refusing to behave like conquered people. Behind him, another report arrived. Human manufacturing output had doubled, no, tripled. Civilian industries were converting at impossible speed. Automobile factories producing armored transports. Agricultural processors building missile components. Civilian shipyards becoming orbital weapons platforms. Not chaotic mobilization. Memory. They had done this before. Many times. They remembered how. Sel Aner entered quietly. She carried no datapad this time. Only the expression of someone bringing bad truth. There is something else, she said. Cale did not turn. Of course there is. She stood beside him at the glass. I interviewed one of the captured human officers from Mars. That made him look. And she asked me a question. Cale waited. Sel's voice had changed. Not fear exactly, but the discomfort of a person whose worldview had been quietly dismantled. She asked how long it had been since our species fought a war against itself. Cale frowned. What did you tell her? The truth. 800 years. He already knew he would dislike the rest. She said that was a difference. The bridge lights reflected cold across the stars. Cale said nothing. Sel looked back at Earth. She said species that stop fighting themselves forget what survival actually costs. They start believing war is a tool instead of a wound. A long silence passed. Then she said the part that stayed with her. She told me, you think we're dangerous because we fight well. That's not it. We're dangerous because we remember what happens when we don't. Cale turned back to the planet. For the first time, he stopped seeing humanity as prey that had learned resistance, and began seeing it as something much worse. A civilization that had survived itself. And if a species could survive that, what exactly did conquest mean to them? Before he could answer, the next alert arrived. Human fleet signatures. Not near Earth, beyond Jupiter. Moving fast. And they were headed for Dominion supply lines. Not defending. Hunting. The attack near Jupiter lasted 19 minutes. 19 minutes was all it took for Cale Veron to understand that the war had changed. The Dominion supply convoy should have been untouchable. Shielded transports carrying fuel cores, ammunition reserves, reinforcement, drones, and enough logistical support to keep the invasion alive for another 6 months. They were protected by escort destroyers, routed far beyond the inner defense zones, and hidden behind standard tactical assumptions. Humans should not even have known where to look. They not only found it, they arrived early. The first warning came when one of the escort ships vanished from a tactical grid, without an explosion, without debris, without a distress signal. Just gone. Then another. Then the convoy entered the debris field of Jupiter's outer moons, and realized the debris was moving, not naturally. Thousands of mining platforms, cargo shells, abandoned civilian freighters, and asteroid fragments shifted in perfect synchronization. Engines hidden for years ignited at once. Gravity paths changed. The battlefield itself rearranged. Human ships emerged from the chaos like predators from deep water. Not large, not elegant, built ugly, built fast, built to survive exactly long enough to matter. They hit the convoy from every impossible angle. They used the moon's shadows to vanish from targeting systems. They turned mining lasers into armor-cutting weapons. They sacrificed ships without hesitation to force Dominion escorts out of formation. They attacked not the strongest vessels, but the pieces that made the strongest vessels possible. Logistics, breathing, blood. By the time Dominion Command restored formation, half the convoy was burning and the other half was running. Cale stood over the report in silence, not because of the losses, because of the intent. This was no desperate resistance. This was strategic dismemberment. They were no longer trying to survive the invasion. They were preparing to outlast it. Sel Aner entered without announcement, which meant what she carried was worse than the report. I found the quarantine record. Cale looked up sharply. She placed the data crystal on his desk like evidence at a funeral. It wasn't a race. It was buried under obsolete council law and sealed under extinct authorization protocols. Someone wanted it forgotten, but not destroyed. Cale activated it. The recording was old enough that the voices felt like archaeology. Council delegates, ancient species, names that existed now only in history texts. The chamber was full of argument. Then one sentence cut through all of it. Earth cannot be conquered safely. Cale leaned closer. The speaker continued. Every civilization that attempts forced subjugation produces the same outcome. Humans do not break. They accelerate. Another voice, angrier. They are pre-industrial. Yes, the first replied, until threatened. Silence. Then the explanation that changed everything. When war becomes existential, human civilization reorganizes around adaptation. They convert loss into instruction faster than any known species. Every invasion teaches them. Every defeat improves them. Every attempt to dominate them creates a stronger enemy than the one before. Cale's hands tightened. The recording continued. We are not containing aggression. We are containing potential. Another delegate asked the question everyone feared. So we exterminate them now? And the answer came immediate. No, because the only thing worse than provoking humanity, a pause, is teaching humanity we were right to be feared. The session ended there. No dramatic conclusion. Only unanimous quarantine. No contact. No conquest. No mistakes. Cale sat very still. Sel spoke carefully. The galaxy knew. He nodded once. Yes. And we came anyway. He looked toward Earth. We were never invading primitives. His voice had gone quieter. We were reopening a warning. Far below, in the underground command center beneath Colorado Granite, Elias Ward received confirmation that Jupiter had gone exactly as planned. He allowed himself one sip of cold coffee. No celebration. Not yet. Victory was dangerous when arrived too early. Around him, officers updated battle projections across walls of moving light. Human survival percentages were climbing. Dominion logistical confidence was collapsing. Mars had become a school. Jupiter had become a statement. But Ward's attention remained fixed on something else. The trend line, the same one he had watched in older wars against older enemies wearing different uniforms. The line had begun to turn, slowly, beautifully. The younger commander beside him studied it. They're hesitating. Ward nodded. Good. Because we're winning? Ward almost smiled. No, because they're finally thinking. He placed the cup down. The dangerous enemy is not the one that hates you. It's the one that still believes you'll behave the way their last enemy did. He tapped the Dominion response curve. Fear makes them predictable. Respect makes them cautious. Caution buys us time. And time. Ward looked up at the stars hidden behind stone. Time is how humans cheat. At that same hour, aboard the Dominion Spear, Cale made the decision he had been resisting since the first transmission. He opened a secure channel to hide Dominion command beyond the containment wall. No signal passed. Still trapped. Still alone. For the first time in his career, he could not ask the Empire what to do. He had to decide himself. His senior officers filled the war chamber that night. Some demanded escalation. Planet killer authorization. Total atmospheric sterilization. Burn Earth before the trend line finished turning. Others argued retreat. If retreat could somehow be engineered through the containment field, they were no longer discussing conquest. They were discussing survival. Cale listened to all of it. Then he stood. The room fell silent. He had led victories for too long to mistake pride for strategy. "We do not escalate blindly," he said. One officer protested immediately. "Marshal, if we panic," Cale interrupted, "we become exactly the enemy they prepared for." Silence again. He let the truth settle. They have seen stronger fleets than ours. That is now obvious. Their buried systems, their containment architecture, the quarantine itself. It means someone came before us. He looked around the room, and someone failed. No one argued, because everyone finally understood the same thing. Earth was not isolated because it was weak. Earth was isolated because history had already tested this once, and history had chosen distance. Cale gave the next order slowly. Full strategic review. No assumptions. I want every human war doctrine, every industrial conversion model, every historical conflict. I want to know what kind of species builds safeguards against itself. He turned toward the observation glass. Below, Earth turned in silence. Blue, calm, terrifying. And somewhere on that world, he knew humans were building ships specifically designed to kill his. Not because they were monsters, because they were learning. And learning, Cale realized, was the one weapon no empire could survive forever. Before dawn ship time, a final message arrived from Earth. Short and signed. Certain. You were supposed to leave us alone. The second line followed 10 seconds later. Now we remember why. The first human ship to cross Saturn's orbit was built in 31 days. Cale Veron read the report twice because the number felt like a translation error. 31 days from raw industrial conversion to combat deployment. A vessel larger than anything humanity had fielded before the invasion, carrying weapon systems specifically calibrated to Dominion shield frequencies, reinforced with alloys that should have required years of refinement, and powered by engines assembled from a design architecture that did not exist in any pre-war intelligence file. It was not an upgrade. It was evolution, and it was only the first. His logistics officer stood before him with the expression of a man reporting weather at the edge of a flood. Their civilian output has surpassed projected wartime conversion models by 212%. They are dismantling luxury industries entirely, entertainment sectors, private aerospace, even civilian transportation infrastructure. Everything is feeding military production. Cale stared at the numbers. They are gutting their own economy. The officer hesitated. No, Marshal. They are replacing it. That was worse. Empires won wars because weaker species needed peace to survive. Humans were behaving like peace was merely the intermission between preparations. Across the Dominion fleet, morale shifted in ways official reports refused to name. It was still discipline, still obedience, still military precision. But soldiers checked exits when entering rooms. Pilots reread engagement reports at night. Officers stopped using the word primitive. Fear had not arrived loudly. It had arrived as professional respect. And professional respect killed certainty faster than panic ever could. Cell Aner found Cale alone in the forward observation chamber, staring at Earth like a man trying to solve a mathematical proof written in blood. She carried another report. Of course she did. There's a pattern, she said. There's always a pattern. She stepped beside him. I reviewed all previous known human conflicts. Internal wars, regional collapses, global wars. The pattern repeats. Cale said nothing. She continued. Humans begin fractured, inefficient, divided against themselves. The early phase is always chaos. Losses are catastrophic. Leadership appears unstable. Outside observers assume collapse. She looked at the blue planet below, and then they reach a threshold. He finally turned. What threshold? Cell's voice was quieter now. The moment survival becomes personal enough that argument stops mattering. She pulled up archive battle footage, ancient by Dominion standards. Burning cities, factories running through bombardment, hospitals functioning under missile fire, civilian volunteers carrying ammunition through ruins. They do not become stronger because they enjoy war, she said. They become stronger because once they decide something must survive, they reorganize reality around that decision. Cale watched the footage, not because it was impressive, Because it was familiar, he had seen the same shape emerging now. Earth was past the threshold. That meant the worst phase had not been the beginning. It was what came next. At the Europa listening station, Captain Lena Voss watched alien scouts die in perfect silence. The station was little more than a frozen skeleton buried beneath kilometers of ice, a forgotten research post converted into something much more useful, a trap. Around her, technicians tracked Dominion reconnaissance teams entering the kill corridor one by one. No direct fire, no dramatic ambush, just information. The scouts were being allowed to see specific things: shipyards under ice, false reactor signatures, incomplete weapons platforms, carefully planted weaknesses. Every image transmitted back to Dominion Command was a lie shaped like truth. Her executive officer raised an eyebrow. They'll believe this? Lena smiled without humor. They don't have to believe it. They just have to respond to it. War, she had learned, was not about destroying the enemy. It was about teaching them the wrong lesson at the right moment. Above Europa, Dominion scouts adjusted formation exactly as predicted. She marked the timeline. 3 days until they committed forces. 3 days until the real operation began elsewhere. Sometimes victory looked like explosions. Sometimes it looked like convincing your enemy to stare at the wrong moon. Back aboard the Dominion Spear, Kale received another request from Senior Command. Biological Weapons Division. He almost denied it on sight. Instead, he let them speak. The director appeared on the secure channel with the face of a scientist trying to sound like morality was someone else's department. They had developed a species-specific pathogen. Fast-acting. High transmission, designed around human cellular regeneration patterns, efficient enough to cripple military infrastructure before large-scale adaptation could occur. A surgical end. No fleet losses. No prolonged war. Just mathematics. Kale listened in silence. Months ago, he would have approved without hesitation. Now he asked a different question. How certain? The director blinked. Commander? How certain are you that this ends them before it teaches them? The scientist had no answer ready. That silence was answer enough. Kale terminated the channel. He stood there for a long moment afterward, disturbed less by the proposal than by the fact that he had become the man asking that question. War changed people. Apparently, even the wrong side. That same night, a hidden message reached him. Unauthorized. Encrypted. Internal source. Selener. He opened alone. It contained only one sentence. If they survive this, they will not stop at defense. Below it, a second line. Ask yourself whether we are still fighting for victory or only for permission to leave alive. Kale deleted the message, then restored it from archive, then stood for an hour without moving because she had said aloud the thought he had refused to name. If humanity crossed a certain line, if enough cities burned, enough names were added to memory, enough lessons were carved into them, this would stop being a war for Earth. It would become a lesson for the galaxy. And humans, once committed to teaching lessons, had a terrifying habit of making them unforgettable. Before dawn, alarms erupted across the fleet. Not attack, movement, massive movement. Human fleet signatures rising from beneath lunar shadow, from asteroid shipyards, from hidden stations near Neptune. Not scattered resistance. Convergence. Dozens, then hundreds. Kale stepped into the war chamber as officers filled the screens with impossible numbers. His tactical chief spoke first. Marshal, they're not defending Earth. He already knew. The vectors were obvious. Every line pointed outward, toward Dominion command positions, toward the fleet, toward him. They're advancing, she finished. No one in the room breathed, because that word changed everything. Invaders defend. Victims endure. But an enemy that advances has already decided the future belongs to them. Kale looked at the approaching fleet and understood, with absolute clarity, that humanity had reached the phase the old council feared most. They were no longer learning how to survive the war. They were learning how to win it. And somewhere beyond all the steel and fire and dead mathematics, Elias Ward was almost certainly watching the same trend line turn. Waiting, not for hope, for timing. Because humans, Kale finally understood, did not rush revenge. They cultivated it. and the harvest had begun. The planet killer proposal arrived at 3:11 ship time. Kale Veron did not need to open the file to know what it contained. He recognized the classification level, the silence that followed his arrival, the way officers avoided looking directly at him as if morality itself had become a contagious thing. Final sanction. Atmospheric sterilization. A weapon so absolute it ended not only wars, but arguments. He opened it anyway. Projected casualties. Total. Strategic justification. Human adaptive acceleration had exceeded acceptable containment thresholds. Continued conflict risked long-term Dominion extinction probabilities beyond command tolerance. Immediate planetary erasure recommended. Clean language for genocide. He read every line. He remembered the first message Earth had sent. You are trespassing in a graveyard. At the time, he had thought it arrogance. Now, he wondered if it had been mercy. His senior command assembled within the hour. Some were relieved. Some were ashamed of being relieved. Some hid both behind military professionalism. The argument was simple. Destroy Earth now, or lose the war later. One admiral spoke with brutal honesty. Marshal, if they are allowed another year, there may not be a Dominion left capable of choosing. Another added, this is not conquest anymore. This is survival. Kale listened, because they were not wrong. That was the problem. War was most dangerous when the terrible option was also the rational one. He dismissed them all except Sel Aner. When the doors sealed, silence stayed with him like a witness. She stood across from him, already knowing. They want extinction. Yes. And you? Kale turned toward the observation glass. Earth floated below, blue and white and infuriatingly beautiful for a world currently teaching his empire humility at gunpoint. I spent my life believing force was clarity, he said. That enough power made difficult decisions simple. Sel waited. He kept watching the planet. I am beginning to think power mostly makes excuses easier. She said nothing for a moment. Then carefully, if you fire that weapon, you prove every buried warning was correct. He nodded once. And if I don't? Her answer came softer. Then you have to trust the species you invaded to decide what happens next. He almost laughed. It sounded like the most dangerous order of all. On Earth, deep beneath Geneva's old mountain bunkers, the Elias War was presented with the same truth from the opposite side. Dominion planet killer signatures were moving into position. There would be no surprise. The enemy wanted the option visible. Fear was part of the weapon. Around the command chamber, officers spoke quickly, controlled by training and barely restrained terror. Evacuation arcs, civilian shield corridors, counterstrike probabilities, retaliation thresholds. Humanity had prepared for this possibility since the first ship entered orbit. Preparation did not make it less monstrous. Ward listened until the room emptied itself into silence. Then he asked the question that mattered. If they fire, how many of them survive us? No one answered immediately. Finally, Admiral Naomi Reyes spoke. Very few. That was true. Earth's buried systems had names no public government ever used. Fail-safes beneath oceans. Dead man networks under mountains. Counterstrike architecture designed not to win, but to ensure no one celebrated after trying. Humanity could not stop a perfect extermination strike, but it could guarantee the galaxy remembered who had chosen it. Ward looked at the projected casualty estimates. Billions. Then at Dominion fleet survivability. Almost none. The old mathematics. Just dressed differently. He thought about the years spent building safeguards against humanity itself. Not because humans were evil, but because grief plus intelligence was one of the most dangerous substances in the universe. This was the threshold. The line ancient civilizations had feared. If Earth crossed it, there would be no returning to the quieter version of itself. He gave the order. Prepare every countermeasure. Faces hardened. Then he added the part they did not expect. But no launch without my authorization. Reyes stared at him. Sir, if they fire first. I know. His voice stayed calm. If they fire first, we survive long enough to make the lesson unforgettable. But until then, we do not become what fear wants us to become. That silence felt heavier than strategy, because restraint under threat was harder than war. Far above, the Dominion Planet Killer platform entered final orbit. It was enormous, ugly in a way only pure purpose could be ugly. No elegance, no diplomacy, just machinery built around the idea that some problems could be solved by removing the place they lived. Across Earth, people watched it in the sky. No panic, not anymore. Families packed emergency shelters. Children asked hard questions adults answered badly. Factories kept running. Hospitals stayed open. Farmers harvested crops under the shadow of extinction because tomorrow still required preparation, even if tomorrow might arrive burning. That quiet, unsettled Kale more than resistance ever had. He requested one final channel to Earth, not to governments. To Elias Ward, the connection opened in seconds. Ward appeared exactly as before, old, composed, carrying the stillness of someone who had already buried fear where it could not be used against him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Kale asked the only honest question left. If our positions were reversed, would you fire? Ward looked at him for so long it stopped feeling like silence. Finally, he answered, yes. Kale absorbed that without surprise. Then Ward continued, and I would spend the rest of my life praying I had found another way first. That landed harder, because monsters rarely admitted the cost of becoming one. Kale exhaled slowly. You understand what happens if I hesitate? Ward nodded. Yes, your officers will call it weakness. And yours, they'll call it dangerous. A faint, tired smile touched Ward's face. Mercy usually is. Kale almost returned it. Almost. He ended the transmission without ceremony. On the bridge, final authorization awaited. One command, one decision, one world. His hand hovered above the console. Around him, officers stood like statues waiting to discover what kind of history they served. Below, Earth remained stubbornly alive. And then, every tactical screen on the bridge flashed white. Alarm screamed. The Planet Killer platform had gone dark, not destroyed, disabled. Simultaneously, every Dominion warship lost weapons control for exactly 9 seconds. 9 seconds. Long enough. When systems returned, the tactical displays showed the impossible. Human boarding fleets, already inside engagement range, already attached to critical hulls, already waiting, not annihilation. Precision. A message appeared on every Dominion screen. No signature needed. We could have ended you. A second line followed. Instead, we would like to talk. Kale stared at it. Around him, the bridge was silent with the terror of people realizing mercy had just been used as a demonstration of power. And for the first time since the war began, he understood exactly who had won. The negotiation took place on the moon, not because Luna was neutral, but because it was honest. From the observation windows of the old Armstrong diplomatic station, both Earth and the shattered remains of Dominion forward platforms were visible at once. One alive, one broken. Both impossible to ignore. It was the kind of place where no one could pretend the war had been theoretical. Kale Veyron arrived with no ceremonial guard. There was no point. Power had already spoken. Across the chamber waited General Elias Ward, Admiral Naomi Reyes, and 3 civilian representatives chosen not for politics, but for memory. One had lost a city in the first orbital strike. One had spent 14 months coordinating refugee corridors. One had once been a trauma surgeon before becoming the person governments called when civilization started bleeding. No flags, no performance, just consequences sitting at a table. Kale stood for a moment before taking his seat. He had attended surrender ceremonies before, dozens of them. He knew their shape. The ritual humiliation, the subtle theater of dominance, the careful language designed to make defeat feel administrative. This room had none of that. That unsettled him more than hatred would have. Ward placed a single folder on the table and slid it forward. Kale almost smiled at the symmetry. The first day above Earth, he had sent terms to a weaker species. Now he was receiving them. He opened the folder. Withdrawal of all Dominion military forces from Sol within 60 days. Full reparation for civilian casualties, planetary damage, and ecological destruction. Permanent demilitarized exclusion zone monitored by independent Galactic Council observers. Complete archival release of all cultural, linguistic, and historical records from every civilization subjugated by the Dominion. 43 species. Languages erased. Histories buried. Art remembered only by the people who destroyed it. This section was the longest, by far. Cale read it twice. Then he looked up. No annexation, he said. No tribute. No dismantling of our government. No forced occupation. Ward folded his hands. No. Cale looked at him for a long moment. You could demand it. Naomi Reyes answered this time. Yes, we could. And yet you don't. The trauma surgeon, the quiet civilian with tired eyes, spoke first, because we know what those terms turn people into. No anger, just truth. Cale sat back. For the first time in years, he felt the full weight of command not as authority, but as inheritance. Every campaign behind him, every world that had been told surrender was mathematics. Every decision explained as necessity. He looked at the cultural restoration section again. This, more than the fleet losses, felt like judgment. You care more about the dead civilizations than punishing us. Ward gave the smallest nod. Punishment is easy. Memory takes work. Silence settled. Outside the station window, Earth turned slowly blue and stubborn. Cale asked the question he had carried since the first transmission. The graveyard. Ward understood immediately. Why call it that? The old general leaned back slightly. Because every species thinks danger looks like teeth. He glanced toward Earth. Most of the time, it looks like memory. He tapped the table once. We buried enough weapons under that planet to make the galaxy nervous. Not because we were planning conquest. Because history taught us something simple. If humanity ever forgot the cost of becoming monsters, someone needed a way to stop us. Cale listened without moving. Ward continued. The graveyard wasn't for invaders. It was for us. That landed harder than any threat, because restraint backed by power was infinitely more frightening than violence. Naomi slid the final page forward. Signature authorization. Cale stared at it. In another life, another campaign, he might have called these terms humiliation. Now he recognized them for what they were. Mercy with witnesses. He signed. Not because he was defeated. Because for the first time, he understood the difference between ending a war and ending a future. When the pen left the page, no one celebrated. There were no victory speeches. Just a long silence shared by people who understood that peace was not triumph. It was labor. As Cale stood to leave, he paused. One question. Ward nodded. Cale looked at him carefully. When you read our original surrender terms, what did you write in the margins? For the first time, Ward smiled. Old, tired, human, mostly notes about your collective punishment clause. Cale almost regretted asking. Why? Ward looked toward Earth. Because I was trying to decide whether you understood what you were starting. A pause. I hoped you didn't. Cale left with that. 20 years later, the Galactic Council had changed enough that younger species treated the old war like mythology. Earth held no throne, claimed no empire, demanded no tribute. Instead, the Council had created a role that had never existed before. Guarantor, not ruler, not conqueror. The species you call when agreements needed to mean something. On the Council station's quiet side, Ambassador Lena Voss, older now, calmer, still incapable of tolerating bad strategic thinking, stood beside a young diplomat from a newly contacted civilization. Beyond the glass, stars stretched cold and endless. On the main display, the new species' first interstellar transmission replayed. Aggressive, confident, territorial, the loud first breath of a civilization convinced the galaxy was something to be claimed. The young diplomat looked nervous. They sound like they're preparing for war. Lena sipped her coffee. They are... Should we be worried? She thought of Mars, of Jupiter, of the moon, of a planet killer platform, going dark for 9 perfect seconds. Then of Elias Ward, retired somewhere on the Atlantic coast, growing tomatoes and pretending he had stopped saving civilizations. She allowed herself a small smile. Not yet. The diplomat frowned. What do we send them? Lena looked at the stars. at history waiting to repeat itself, and at the long road between first contact and wisdom. Then she answered, the full diplomatic package. A pause, and a map. To what? Her smile turned sharper. The graveyard. Far away, across cold light years, a young species waited to learn what answered arrogance in a universe old enough to remember. And somewhere beneath blue oceans, under mountains, beneath deserts and cities, and ordinary human lives, the old system still slept, not hungry, not angry, just waiting, because humanity had learned the hardest lesson of all. Power was never the thing that made them dangerous. It was the choice not to use it. And that choice, made again and again in the shadow of war, was what made the galaxy finally understand what humans truly were. Not the deadliest species. Something far worse. The kind that could win and still choose mercy.